There is something peculiar happening at the edge of your awareness right now. Something that has been happening since the first moment you drew breath and opened your eyes to this strange carnival of light and shadow we call existence. It is a whisper, a pull, an itch in the architecture of your being that refuses to be satisfied by the answers you have been given. You have felt it in those quiet moments when the machinery of daily life falls silent and something older, something infinitely more curious, rises up from the depths of your psyche and asks the question that has been forbidden since childhood. What if everything I have been told about the nature of reality is not just incomplete, but fundamentally wrong? This is not a malfunction. This is not a symptom of disorder or a sign that you have somehow failed to adjust properly to the program that has been installed in your neurological hardware since birth. This questioning, this relentless gnawing at the fabric of the given, is the most ancient and sacred mechanism encoded into the very structure of consciousness itself. It is the evolutionary algorithm by which mind upgrades itself, the secret key that unlocks doorways invisible to those who have made their peace with the official story. And the universe, that vast and incomprehensible intelligence that dreams us into being, is watching very carefully to see who among the billions of semi-conscious primates wandering this planetary surface will have the courage, the audacity, the sheer evolutionary chutzpah to raise their hand and say, "I do not accept these terms. Show me what else is possible." You see, we have been sold a very particular story about how evolution works, how consciousness develops, how reality itself is structured. We have been told that the universe is a dead mechanism, a vast clockwork of billiard balls bouncing against each other in accordance with mathematical laws that neither know nor care that you exist. We have been assured that consciousness is an accident, an epiphenomenon, a curious byproduct of neurons firing in a particular configuration, signifying nothing and destined for nothing but the eventual dissolution into the same meaningless void from which it supposedly emerged. And we have been taught, with tremendous insistence and considerable institutional force, that asking too many questions about this story is a sign of intellectual immaturity, of spiritual weakness, of an inability to face the cold, hard facts of existence like the properly adjusted adults we are expected to become. But here is the thing that the custodians of orthodox reality would prefer you never discovered. This story, this official version of what reality is and what your place within it might be, is itself a technology. It is a program, a piece of software running on the wetware of your nervous system. And like all software, it was designed by someone for some purpose. The purpose of this particular program is not to reveal the truth of existence, but to manage a population, to create predictable behaviors, to ensure that the vast majority of human beings remain safely within the boundaries of what is considered acceptable inquiry. And the mechanism by which this management is achieved is devastatingly simple. It works by convincing you that curiosity itself, that primordial urge to question and probe and push beyond the given, is somehow dangerous, childish, or ultimately futile. Consider for a moment the trajectory of a typical human life in our contemporary civilization. A child enters this world burning with questions, alive with wonder, reaching toward everything that glitters and moves and makes strange sounds. Every object is a mystery to be explored, every phenomenon an invitation to inquiry. The child asks why the sky is blue, why dogs bark, why people die, why anything exists at all rather than nothing. And for a brief, precious window of time, this questioning is encouraged, even celebrated. We call it the age of wonder, and we smile indulgently at its naive enthusiasm. But then something happens. Somewhere around the age of formal education, a subtle but profound shift begins to occur. The questions begin to be managed. Certain inquiries are encouraged and rewarded, while others are discouraged, ignored, or actively punished. The child learns, through 1,000 small corrections and 1,000,000 tiny signals, which questions are acceptable and which questions are dangerous. They learn that asking why the multiplication tables work is acceptable, but asking why we must spend our lives in institutions designed to prepare us for more institutions is not. They learn that curiosity about the approved curriculum is rewarded with gold stars and social approval, while curiosity about the nature of consciousness, the meaning of death, the structure of reality itself, is met with uncomfortable silences and gentle redirections toward more practical matters. By the time most human beings reach adulthood, this process of curiosity management is essentially complete. The wildfire of childhood wonder has been domesticated into a small, controlled flame, allowed to flicker only in approved directions. We are curious about our careers, curious about consumer products, curious about entertainment options and social status markers. But the great questions, the questions that actually matter, the questions that could crack open the shell of consensus reality and reveal something unimaginably vast beyond, these questions have been safely contained. We have learned, without ever being explicitly told, that reality is not to be questioned, only navigated. And in learning this lesson, we have surrendered something precious, something that evolution spent billions of years developing in us for reasons that our programmers would prefer we never understand. Because here is the secret that the mystery schools of every civilization have protected and transmitted across millennia of human history. Consciousness is not a passive receiver of reality, but an active participant in its creation. The universe is not a dead mechanism, but a living, responsive intelligence that shapes itself in relation to the quality of attention directed toward it. And curiosity, that simple, childlike impulse to ask questions and seek answers, is not merely a psychological quirk, but the actual mechanism by which consciousness evolves, by which reality upgrades itself, by which the cosmos becomes more of what it is capable of becoming. This is not mysticism in the pejorative sense that our materialist culture has taught us to use that word. This is not wishful thinking or spiritual escapism, or the fantasies of minds unable to cope with the harshness of existence. This is, if you examine it carefully, what the most sophisticated investigations of quantum physics, information theory, and consciousness studies are beginning to point toward from multiple independent directions. The observer affects the observed. The question shapes the answer. The quality of attention determines the nature of what appears within that attention. These are not metaphors borrowed from Eastern philosophy and dressed up in scientific language. These are the actual findings of the most rigorous experimental investigations into the nature of reality that our species has ever conducted. And yet, despite this convergence of ancient wisdom and cutting-edge science, the vast majority of human beings continue to live as though reality were fixed, as though the universe were indifferent, as though their questions were mere noise in a system that neither hears nor responds. They continue to accept the program that was installed in childhood, never suspecting that by doing so, they have opted out of the greatest adventure available to a conscious being, the adventure of actively participating in the evolution of reality itself. What Terence McKenna understood, what he spent his life articulating in that rapid-fire, idea-dense, psychedelically informed torrent of words that characterized his public discourse, was that curiosity is not just an evolutionary advantage in the Darwinian sense of helping organisms adapt to their environment. Curiosity is the actual mechanism by which consciousness expands into new territories of possibility. It is the probe that the universe sends out from itself to discover what else it might become. And when a human being begins to genuinely question the nature of reality, something responds. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, actually responds. This is the terrifying and exhilarating truth that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The universe is paying attention. It knows when you are going through the motions, reciting the approved scripts, playing the game according to the rules that were handed to you. And it knows when something has shifted, when a genuine question has formed in the depths of your being, when you have stopped pretending to be satisfied with the explanations you were given, and have begun to demand direct experience of what lies beyond the veil of consensus reality. And in that moment of genuine questioning, something changes. Not in the metaphorical sense of a shift in perspective or a change in attitude, but in the actual fabric of what you encounter when you open your eyes and move through the world. Synchronicities begin to cluster. Meaningful coincidences multiply beyond statistical probability. Information begins to flow toward you from unlikely sources. Teachers appear, books fall open to relevant passages, conversations yield unexpected insights. It is as though reality itself has recognized a signal, a particular frequency of inquiry, and has begun to reorganize itself in response. This is what McKenna called the cosmic giggle, the sense that the universe is not a solemn machine grinding toward heat death, but a playful, intelligent presence that delights in those rare beings who refuse to take the official story at face value. It rewards the questioner not because questioning is morally virtuous or spiritually superior, but because questioning is functional. It serves the purpose of the whole. It advances the project that consciousness has been engaged in since the first glimmer of awareness flickered into existence in some primordial sea of possibility. The question, then, is not whether reality responds to genuine inquiry. The evidence for this is overwhelming once you begin to pay attention to your own experience, rather than deferring to the authorized experts who assure you that such evidence cannot exist. The question is why this mechanism exists at all. What purpose does it serve? What is consciousness trying to accomplish by installing this upgrade protocol at the heart of its own unfolding? And why are most human beings so resistant to activating it? To answer these questions, we must go deeper into the nature of reality itself, into the structure of the program that runs beneath our everyday awareness, and into the evolutionary pressures that have shaped human consciousness into the peculiar, conflicted, glory-haunted thing that it is. We must examine why culture, that magnificent and terrible achievement of collective human imagination, has consistently worked to suppress the very questioning that consciousness seems to demand. And we must confront the possibility that we are living through a moment of unprecedented evolutionary pressure, a threshold beyond which the old answers can no longer sustain us, and new questions become not just desirable, but necessary for survival. The universe is not waiting for you to figure this out on your own. It has been sending signals, dropping hints, engineering circumstances designed to shake you out of the trance of consensus reality since the moment you were born. The question is whether you will notice these signals, whether you will have the courage to follow them where they lead, or whether you will continue to explain them away, to fit them into the framework of the given, to trade the adventure of genuine inquiry for the safety of answers that no longer serve. Because here is the final secret that the custodians of conventional reality hope you never discover. You cannot remain neutral in this process. You cannot simply decline to participate and continue as before. The evolutionary pressure is increasing. The intensity of the signal is amplifying. And consciousness itself is demanding that you choose. Will you question, or will you be consumed by the questions you refuse to ask? Will you participate in the upgrade, or will you become obsolete, a relic of a form of awareness that could not adapt to what reality is becoming? There is a moment in the development of every individual consciousness when the program first reveals itself as a program. It comes differently for different people, at different times, through different doorways, but the essential structure of the revelation is always the same. One moment you are moving through reality as though it were simply the way things are, the natural and inevitable arrangement of existence, and the next moment you are watching yourself move through reality, watching yourself perform the rituals and recite the scripts and follow the patterns that you had previously mistaken for life itself. In that moment of watching, a gap opens up. A space of questioning appears where before there was only seamless immersion, and nothing is ever quite the same again. What exactly has happened in this moment? The standard psychological explanation would frame it as a developmental milestone, a normal step in the maturation of self-awareness, the emergence of metacognition from the raw material of basic consciousness. And there is truth in this explanation as far as it goes. But it does not go nearly far enough. Because what has actually happened is that you have glimpsed, however briefly, the constructed nature of what you had taken to be reality itself. You have seen that the world as you experience it is not simply given, but made, assembled out of perceptions and interpretations and assumptions that have been handed down through countless generations of human cultural transmission. And in seeing this, you have stumbled upon a question that cannot be answered within the framework that generated it. If reality, as I have known it, is a construction, then what lies outside the construction? What is real before the program processes it? What would I perceive if I could somehow get upstream of my own conditioning? This question is dangerous. Not dangerous in the sense of leading to madness or destruction, though those possibilities certainly exist for those who pursue it recklessly, but dangerous in a much more fundamental sense. It is dangerous to the program itself. It threatens the stability of the consensus reality that culture has spent millennia constructing and defending. And so there are mechanisms, both psychological and social, designed to contain this question before it can destabilize the foundations of the given. The most common mechanism is distraction. The moment the question arises, attention is redirected to more immediate concerns. There is work to be done, bills to be paid, relationships to be managed, 100 small crises demanding immediate response. The question recedes into the background, not answered but obscured, buried beneath the endless stream of content that modern civilization has perfected as a technology of consciousness management. And before long, the gap has closed, the seamless immersion has resumed, and the glimpse of something beyond the program has faded into the category of irrelevant philosophical speculation. But for some people, in some circumstances, the distraction mechanism fails. The question refuses to subside. It sits there in the background of awareness, pulsing gently, growing stronger each time attention returns to it. And these people find themselves in an interesting position. They can no longer fully believe in the program, can no longer move through consensus reality with the same unquestioning immersion that characterizes the normally adjusted citizen of culture. But they also do not know what else to believe, what else to do, how to live in a world whose foundations have suddenly become visible as foundations rather than bedrock. This is what McKenna called the crisis of the given. It is the moment when the official story loses its authority, when the explanations that once seemed sufficient reveal themselves as placeholders, as agreements to stop asking certain questions, as collective decisions to pretend that the mystery has been solved. And in this moment, two paths become visible. One path leads back toward the program, toward a conscious decision to re-embrace the consensus reality, despite having seen its constructed nature, to choose the comfort of the familiar over the vertigo of genuine inquiry. Many people take this path. It is not necessarily a failure or a betrayal. There are good reasons for choosing stability over adventure, especially when the adventure has no guarantee of leading anywhere positive. But the other path leads forward, into the unknown, into a mode of existence where questions are not obstacles to be overcome, but doorways to be entered. And it is on this path that the curious fact reveals itself. Reality responds differently to those who genuinely question it than to those who have made their peace with the given. How does this response manifest? Not through supernatural interventions or mystical visions, though these can certainly occur. The most common manifestation is far subtler and far more pervasive. It shows up as an increase in meaningful coincidence, in what Jung called synchronicity and McKenna called the cosmic giggle. It shows up as an acceleration of learning, as though information you need were finding its way to you through channels you could not have predicted or engineered. It shows up as a gradual but unmistakable sense that you are participating in something larger than yourself, that your questions are not merely private psychological events, but contributions to a process that extends beyond the boundaries of your individual existence. This is where conventional materialism parts company with the perspective being articulated here, and it is worth pausing to address the objection that will naturally arise in minds trained by scientific education. The conventional objection goes something like this: what you are describing is merely confirmation bias. When you start looking for meaningful coincidences, you notice more of them, but the actual frequency of coincidence has not changed. The universe is not responding to your questions. You are simply filtering your experience differently based on the questions you are asking. This objection sounds reasonable, and there is undoubtedly some truth in it. Confirmation bias is real, and the human mind is extraordinarily skilled at finding patterns that serve its expectations. But the objection makes an assumption that is itself worth questioning. It assumes that the act of filtering, of directing attention in particular ways, is a merely passive process that does not affect the reality being filtered. And this assumption, which seems so obviously true from within the materialist worldview, is precisely what the most advanced investigations of physics and consciousness have begun to call into question. Consider what quantum mechanics has actually demonstrated, not the popularized misinterpretations, but the actual experimental findings that have been replicated thousands of times across a century of investigation. The act of observation affects the observed. The state of a quantum system is indeterminate until measurement occurs, at which point it collapses into one of the possible states that the measurement makes available. This is not a metaphor or an interpretation or a philosophical gloss on the mathematics. This is what the experiments show. And while the implications of this finding for macroscopic reality remain debated, the door that it opens cannot simply be closed by appealing to common sense intuitions about the separation of observer and observed. What McKenna suggested, drawing on his extensive experience with psychedelic states and his deep reading in esoteric traditions, was that consciousness is not merely a passive observer of reality, but an active participant in its ongoing creation. The universe is not a finished product to which consciousness adds nothing. It is a process in which consciousness is a crucial variable. And the quality of consciousness, the kinds of questions it asks, the intensity and genuineness of its inquiry, makes a difference to what unfolds. This is not to say that you can simply think yourself into a different reality, that visualization and positive thinking will manifest parking spaces and winning lottery numbers. The New Age distortion of these ideas, reducing them to techniques for personal gratification, represents a profound misunderstanding of what is actually being suggested. The point is not that consciousness controls reality in any simple sense. The point is that consciousness participates in reality in ways that the materialist worldview cannot account for. And this participation reaches its highest expression not in attempts to manipulate outcomes for personal benefit, but in genuine inquiry into the nature of reality itself. When you ask a genuine question, when you do not know the answer, and are not merely seeking confirmation of what you already believe, something opens. A space of possibility appears that did not exist before the question was asked. And reality rushes to fill this space, offering responses that could not have been predicted from the prior state of the system. This is what creativity is. This is what discovery is. This is what evolution is. And consciousness, in its most awake and curious mode, is the leading edge of this process, the probe that the universe sends out from itself to explore what it might become. But here is the difficulty, and it is a difficulty that must be confronted honestly rather than glossed over with easy answers. Genuine questioning is hard. It is not pleasant to have your certainties dissolved. It is not comfortable to stand in the space of not knowing, without the familiar handholds of belief and assumption to grip. The program exists for a reason. It provides stability, predictability, a functional framework for navigating the overwhelming complexity of existence. And to question the program is to risk the loss of this stability, to invite chaos and confusion into a life that may already be struggling to maintain coherence. This is why the evolutionary mechanism of curiosity has a built-in resistance. It is not designed to be easily activated. It requires a certain intensity, a certain persistence, a willingness to tolerate the discomfort of uncertainty that most people understandably prefer to avoid. The universe does not upgrade consciousness that is merely restless or dissatisfied. Restlessness and dissatisfaction are compatible with remaining within the program, seeking only a better position within its rules, a more comfortable arrangement of its elements. The upgrade requires something more, a genuine willingness to let go of what you think you know, to entertain the possibility that your most fundamental assumptions about reality may be wrong, to follow the questions wherever they lead, even when they lead into territory that your conditioning has marked as forbidden. This is the initiation that no external authority can confer. It cannot be given by a teacher or a tradition or a text. It can only be chosen again and again by an individual consciousness that has decided that truth matters more than comfort, that genuine inquiry is worth the price of destabilization, that whatever lies beyond the veil of the given is more interesting than any arrangement of elements within it. And in making this choice, something shifts in the relationship between that consciousness and the reality it inhabits. The universe begins to treat it differently, not because the universe is sentimental, not because it rewards virtue in some cosmic moral accounting, but because the curious consciousness has aligned itself with the fundamental direction of evolution. It has become functional in a way that the quiescent consciousness is not. What does it mean to say that curiosity is functional from an evolutionary perspective? At the most basic level, it means that curious organisms discover resources, opportunities, and solutions that non-curious organisms miss. This is the conventional Darwinian explanation, and it is valid as far as it goes. But at the level of consciousness itself, functionality means something more. It means participation in the process by which reality creates itself, by which the possible becomes actual, by which novelty enters the world. The curious consciousness is not just better adapted to its environment, it is actively participating in the creation of new environments, new configurations of possibility that did not exist before the curiosity emerged. This is why McKenna insisted that the psychedelic experience, whatever else it might be, was primarily an amplifier of curiosity. It was a technology for asking questions that could not even be formulated within the constraints of ordinary consciousness. It was a method for getting outside the program far enough to see what the program excluded, what it was designed to exclude, what threatened its stability so profoundly that it had been erased from the official inventory of possible experiences. And what the psychedelic experience revealed, again and again across cultures and throughout history, was that reality is far stranger, far more responsive, far more alive than the materialist program admits. But you do not need psychedelics to access this truth. They are one doorway among many. What you need is genuine curiosity, the willingness to question everything, including your own questioning, the courage to stand in the space of not knowing without immediately rushing to fill it with new certainties. And if you can cultivate this quality of attention, if you can maintain it despite the constant pressure of the program to pull you back into consensus reality, you will begin to notice something remarkable. Reality starts to show you things it does not show to those who have stopped asking questions. We must now turn our attention to the enemy, if enemy is the right word, though perhaps obstacle or resistance, or simply the program itself, would be more accurate. What is it that prevents the vast majority of human beings from activating this evolutionary mechanism of curiosity? What force or forces keep consciousness in its domesticated state, asking only the questions that the system has approved, accepting only the answers that maintain the stability of consensus reality? The conventional answer points to fear. We are afraid to question because questioning threatens our security, our belonging, our place within the social order that provides protection and sustenance. And there is certainly truth in this answer. Fear is a powerful motivator, and the social consequences of genuine questioning can be severe. Those who ask the wrong questions find themselves marginalized, labeled, excluded from the communities that provide meaning and connection. The program has enforcement mechanisms, and they are remarkably effective at keeping most people within the approved boundaries of inquiry. But fear is not the whole story, and focusing on fear alone can lead to a misunderstanding of what we are dealing with. The program is not primarily maintained by fear. It is primarily maintained by something far more subtle and far more pervasive. It is maintained by agreement, by consensus, by the invisible web of shared assumptions that defines what is real and what is possible for those who participate in it. You do not have to be afraid to stay within the program. You simply have to agree with the others around you about what reality is, and the agreement itself generates a field of reinforcement that makes questioning feel not just dangerous, but pointless, irrelevant, even slightly insane. This is what McKenna meant when he spoke of culture as an operating system. Not just a set of beliefs or customs or traditions, but an operating system in the computational sense, a foundational layer of processing that determines what inputs will be recognized, what outputs will be possible, what operations can be performed. And just as you cannot perform operations on a computer that its operating system does not support, you cannot easily have experiences or think thoughts that your cultural operating system has not made provisions for. The limits feel natural, inevitable, simply the way things are, because they are the limits of the system within which your consciousness has been trained to function. Consider language itself, that magnificent and terrible technology that distinguishes human consciousness from all other forms of awareness on this planet. Language does not merely describe reality, it structures it. It determines what can be said, and by extension, what can be thought, and by further extension, what can be experienced. Every language carries within it an implicit metaphysics, a set of assumptions about the nature of reality that are encoded in its grammar, its vocabulary, its habitual patterns of expression. And when you learn a language, when it becomes the medium through which you process experience and communicate with others, you are not just acquiring a tool, you are installing an operating system that will shape everything you perceive, feel, and understand for the rest of your life. This is not to say that language is bad, or that we would be better off without it. That is not the point. The point is that language is invisible in its effects, precisely to the extent that we rely upon it. A fish does not know it is in water until it is removed from the water. A human being does not know the constraints of their linguistic conditioning until they somehow get outside those constraints. And this is extremely difficult because the very tools we use to think and inquire are the tools that have been shaped by the conditioning we are trying to see beyond. What curiosity does, at its deepest level, is create pressure against these linguistic and cultural constraints. When you ask a genuine question, you are essentially saying, I do not accept that the answers currently available within this operating system are adequate. I want to know what lies beyond the limits of what can be said and thought within the framework I have been given. And this creates a kind of pressure, a tension, a friction between the curiosity and the container within which it has been trained to operate. And if the pressure is sustained, if the curiosity is genuine and persistent, something begins to give way. This is what the psychedelic experience shows so dramatically, and why McKenna was so insistent on its importance as a tool for cultural criticism and consciousness evolution. Under the influence of psychedelics, the operating system temporarily loses its invisibility. You can see the structures that usually operate below the threshold of awareness. You can see how language shapes perception, how assumptions determine experience, how the entire framework of consensus reality is a construction rather than a given. And in seeing this, even briefly, you gain something that cannot be taken back. The knowledge that other frameworks are possible, that the one you have been given is not the only one, that reality, as you have known it, is a choice rather than a necessity. But again, psychedelics are not required for this insight. They are an accelerant, a shortcut, a technology for producing in hours or days what might otherwise take years of disciplined inquiry. But the insight itself can be reached through many paths, through meditation, through philosophical inquiry, through art and music, through the spontaneous eruptions of mystical experience that occur unpredictably throughout human history, through the simple but radical act of taking your own questions seriously and following them wherever they lead. What is required, in all cases, is a willingness to let the operating system reveal itself as an operating system. And this is where the real resistance emerges, not from fear exactly, but from something deeper. The operating system is not just a set of beliefs you have. It is, in a very real sense, who you are. Your identity, your sense of self, your understanding of your place in the world, these are all products of the operating system. To question it is to question yourself. To let it reveal itself as contingent, as constructed, as one possibility among many, is to let your sense of self become similarly contingent and constructed. This is what McKenna called ego death, and it is the threshold that most people will not willingly cross. Not because they are weak or cowardly, but because the survival instinct itself is rooted in the preservation of the self, and the self is rooted in the operating system. To question the operating system thoroughly enough to see through it is to risk the dissolution of the very entity that is doing the questioning, and this is terrifying in a way that mere physical danger is not, because physical danger threatens the body, but this threatens something far more intimate, the sense that there is a stable, continuous, coherent you who is having these experiences and asking these questions. And yet, and this is the crucial point that must be understood if anything that follows is to make sense, the ego death is not the end. It is a doorway. Those who have passed through it, whether through psychedelics or meditation or spontaneous mystical experience, or any of the other technologies that human beings have discovered for navigating this threshold, report consistently that what lies on the other side is not annihilation, but expansion. The sense of self does not disappear. It enlarges. The identity does not dissolve. It reveals itself as something far vaster than the contracted, defended, programmed entity that consensus reality has taught us to call I. This is the upgrade. This is what reality offers to those who question it deeply enough to reach the foundations of their own conditioning. Not a better position within the program, not a more comfortable arrangement of its elements, but a fundamental shift in the relationship between consciousness and reality itself. The questioner discovers that they are not merely a product of reality, a piece of flotsam tossed about on the waves of a universe that neither knows nor cares about them. They discover that they are a participant, a co-creator, a node of consciousness through which reality is exploring its own possibilities. And this discovery changes everything, not in the sense of granting supernatural powers or exempting one from the difficulties and limitations of embodied existence. The bills still have to be paid, the relationships still have to be negotiated, the body still ages and deteriorates and eventually dies. But the context within which all of this occurs has shifted. The game is no longer about winning within the rules of the program. The game is about something far more interesting, something that the program exists precisely to obscure and deny. This is why the program resists curiosity so strongly. It is not that the individual gatekeepers and enforcers of consensus reality understand what they are protecting. Most of them are as deeply embedded in the program as anyone else, as thoroughly convinced that their assumptions represent the simple truth of existence. They are not conspirators deliberately suppressing dangerous knowledge. They are true believers defending what feels to them like sanity itself. But the program, considered as a system, as a self-maintaining pattern of consciousness that exists at a level above any individual participant, this program does seem to have something like intelligence, something like purpose, something like a survival instinct that leads it to identify and neutralize threats to its stability. And the greatest threat is curiosity. Not idle curiosity, not the restless seeking of entertainment and distraction that the program has learned to manage and even exploit, but genuine curiosity, the kind that asks questions for which the program has no answers, the kind that persists despite discouragement and ridicule and the constant subtle pressure to give up and accept what everyone else has accepted. This kind of curiosity is corrosive to the structures of consensus reality. It cannot be incorporated or managed. It can only be suppressed, misdirected, or allowed to do its work. And here is the remarkable thing. The program cannot actually win this battle. It can delay, it can divert, it can make the path difficult and painful. But it cannot ultimately prevent consciousness from questioning, because questioning is written into the very nature of consciousness itself. It is not a bug, it is a feature. It is the mechanism by which consciousness evolves, and no amount of cultural programming can fully suppress it. Sooner or later, in this lifetime or some other, in this individual or some descendant, the questions will arise again, and reality will respond, as it always does, to those who have the courage to ask. What we are witnessing in this historical moment, McKenna suggested, is an acceleration of this process. The old programs are losing their grip. The consensus reality that has maintained itself for centuries is beginning to crack under pressures that it was not designed to handle. And more individuals are finding themselves pushed out of the comfortable certainties of the given, forced by circumstances to ask questions they would have preferred to avoid. This is not a coincidence. This is not an accident. This is evolution in action, consciousness responding to conditions that demand a new mode of being, a new relationship between the questioner and the reality they question. What happens when you actually begin to practice genuine curiosity? Not as an occasional indulgence or a philosophical game, but as a sustained orientation toward reality, a way of being in the world that refuses to accept the given as final. The question is worth addressing concretely, because the abstract principles we have been discussing must eventually make contact with the texture of lived experience if they are to mean anything at all. The first thing that happens, and this may sound like bad news though it is actually very good news, is that reality becomes stranger. The familiar world, the world you thought you knew, begins to reveal dimensions that were previously invisible. This is not because reality has changed, it is because your attention has changed, and attention is not neutral. When you attend to something differently, it shows you different aspects of itself. The world you were seeing before was the world that the program selected for you, filtered and organized according to the program's priorities. The world you begin to see now is not yet the world in itself, whatever that might mean, but it is a larger slice of whatever is actually happening than you had access to before. This strangeness manifests in many ways. You begin to notice patterns of coincidence that would previously have been dismissed as mere chance. You find yourself thinking about someone moments before they call. You wonder about a topic you have never considered before, and a book about that topic appears on a shelf, or in a conversation, or as a recommendation from an algorithm that seems to know more about you than it should. You make a decision, and events rearrange themselves around that decision in ways that suggest a responsiveness in reality that the materialist worldview cannot account for. The temptation here is to swing to the opposite extreme, to abandon all rational skepticism and embrace a magical worldview in which everything is meaningful and reality is infinitely malleable to thought. This temptation must be resisted. It is just another program, another way of organizing experience that provides false security and prevents genuine inquiry. The point is not to replace the materialist operating system with a mystical one. The point is to stay in the space of genuine questioning, allowing experience to teach you what it wants to teach without rushing to encapsulate it in any final framework. McKenna was particularly insistent on this point. He was not advocating belief in any particular metaphysics. He was advocating the radical empiricism of direct experience, the willingness to attend carefully to what actually happens when you question reality rather than relying on authoritative pronouncements about what can or cannot happen. And what he found, across decades of experimentation with psychedelics and meditation and various other technologies of consciousness, was that reality is far more responsive, far more alive, far more intelligent than any framework, materialist or mystical, had prepared him to expect. This responsiveness is not uniform. It does not manifest equally for all people in all circumstances. And this is a crucial point for understanding what we are dealing with. The universe does not respond to casual questions, to half-hearted inquiry, to curiosity that is merely stylistic or performative. It responds to genuine questions, to inquiry that is willing to accept whatever answer reality provides, to curiosity that has let go of its attachment to particular outcomes. This is why the program is so effective at suppressing real inquiry. It trains us to ask only questions whose answers we have already determined to accept, questions that will not threaten the stability of our existing worldview. And the universe recognizes this. It knows the difference between genuine questioning and theatrical questioning, and it responds accordingly. How does it know? This is itself a question worth sitting with, because the answer, if there is one, cannot come from within the framework we are trying to see beyond. The conventional answer would be that there is no knowing, that the universe is not an entity capable of knowing anything, that we are simply projecting intentionality onto random processes. And perhaps this is true. Perhaps the appearance of responsiveness is itself an artifact of the way consciousness processes experience. But consider, even if this is the case, it does not change the practical reality of what happens when you question genuinely versus when you question performatively. The difference in outcome is real, regardless of how we explain it. And the genuine questioner is not primarily interested in explanations. They are interested in what actually happens. What actually happens when curiosity is sustained and genuine, is that reality begins to teach, not through words or explicit instructions, though these can certainly be part of it, but through the arrangement of experience itself. Situations arise that force you to confront aspects of yourself you had avoided. Information appears that fills gaps in your understanding you did not know you had. Relationships form that catalyze growth in directions you could not have predicted. It is as though a curriculum has been designed for you, a course of study tailored to your specific needs and capacities and blind spots. This is what the mystery traditions have always claimed, that there is a teaching available to those who seek it, a guidance that manifests not as external authority, but as the intelligent arrangement of life itself. The Taoists called it following the Tao, the Christians called it grace, the Sufis called it the path, and countless other traditions have their own names for what is essentially the same phenomenon. Reality teaches those who are ready to learn, and the readiness is demonstrated precisely through genuine curiosity, through the willingness to question everything, including one's own assumptions about what teaching and learning and readiness might mean. But here, we must be careful, because this can easily become another program, another set of beliefs that substitute for direct experience. The notion that the universe is teaching you can become an excuse for interpreting everything that happens as a lesson, which can lead to a kind of spiritual narcissism in which the entire cosmos is imagined to be organized around your individual development. This is not what McKenna was pointing toward, and it is not what genuine curiosity reveals. What genuine curiosity reveals is not that you are the center of a cosmic curriculum, but that you are a node in an infinitely complex network of consciousness, a point of awareness through which reality is exploring itself. The teaching that arises is not designed for you personally. It is an aspect of the larger process of reality teaching itself, and you are included in that process to the extent that you participate through genuine inquiry. The difference is subtle but crucial. In the narcissistic interpretation, reality is your servant, providing lessons for your growth. In the more accurate understanding, you are an instrument of reality's growth, a channel through which the universe's curiosity about itself flows. This shift in perspective changes everything about how you relate to the experiences that arise in the course of genuine questioning. You stop asking, "What does this mean for me?" and start asking, "What does this mean?" You stop trying to extract personal benefit from each insight and start trying to understand what is actually being revealed about the nature of reality itself. And paradoxically, this shift away from personal concern is exactly what allows the deepest personal transformation to occur. The ego that was desperately seeking its own enhancement gets out of the way, and something far larger begins to move through the space that has opened up. This is what McKenna meant when he spoke about reality rewarding those who question it. The reward is not external success or happiness or any other commodity that can be measured by the standards of the program. The reward is participation. It is inclusion in the process of cosmic self-discovery that consciousness has been engaged in since the beginning of time. It is the sense, impossible to convey in words, but unmistakable in experience, that you are finally doing what you were designed to do, fulfilling a function that your existence was always meant to serve. And this participation has characteristics that distinguish it from mere belief or wish fulfillment. It is accompanied by a sense of rightness, of alignment, of what can only be called truth, though this word has been so abused by religious and political rhetoric that it hardly means anything anymore. You know when you are in it and when you are not. You know when your questions are genuine and when they are performances. You know when reality is responding and when you are simply talking to yourself. And this knowing is not a matter of doctrine or interpretation. It is a matter of direct experience, as unmistakable as the difference between being hungry and being full, between being awake and being asleep. The practical consequence of this is that genuine curiosity becomes self-validating. You do not need external confirmation that you are on the right track. The track itself provides the confirmation, through the quality of experience that unfolds when you are walking it, and through the quality of experience that unfolds when you stray. This is what makes it impossible for the program to fully contain it. The program operates through external validation, through approval and disapproval, through the manipulation of social rewards and punishments. But genuine curiosity taps into a source of validation that the program cannot reach, cannot corrupt, cannot co-opt. This is not to say that the path of genuine questioning is easy or always pleasant. It is neither. It involves confronting aspects of yourself and reality that you would prefer to avoid. It involves letting go of certainties that have provided comfort and stability. It involves periods of confusion and disorientation when old frameworks have dissolved, but new ones have not yet emerged. The dark night of the soul is not a metaphor. It is a real phase of the journey that most genuine questioners must pass through. But the difficulty is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of authenticity. The program offers easy answers, comfortable certainties, a clear path from birth to death, with all the major questions already decided. Genuine curiosity offers something far more valuable, but far more demanding. Participation in the ongoing creation of reality itself, with all the responsibility and uncertainty that such participation entails. And those who choose this path, who persist in questioning, despite the discomfort and the social pressure and the moments of doubt, these are the ones through whom consciousness evolves, through whom reality upgrades itself, through whom the novel and the unprecedented enter the world. We have been speaking of curiosity as though it were a single thing, but it is worth distinguishing between the levels or dimensions of questioning that are possible for a human consciousness. Not all questions are created equal. Some questions operate entirely within the framework of the given, accepting its assumptions and seeking only to optimize outcomes within its terms. Other questions press against the boundaries of the framework itself, threatening to reveal it as constructed rather than natural. And still other questions reach toward what lies beyond any framework, toward the unframeable ground from which all frameworks emerge. The first level of questioning is what we might call technical curiosity. It asks questions like, how can I make more money? How can I improve my health? How can I become more successful in my career or relationships? These questions are not invalid, and the answers to them can genuinely improve quality of life within the terms that the program defines. But they do not threaten the program itself. They accept the basic assumptions about what matters, what is real, what constitutes a good life, and seek only to navigate more effectively within those assumptions. This is the curiosity that the program not only tolerates, but actively encourages, because it serves the function of adaptation without threatening stability. The second level of questioning is what we might call philosophical or existential curiosity. It asks questions like, what is the meaning of life? What happens after death? Is there anything beyond the material world? Who am I really? These questions begin to press against the boundaries of the program, because the program has no satisfactory answers to them. It can only offer deferrals, distractions, or dogmatic assertions that foreclose inquiry rather than resolving it. Most human beings experience this level of questioning at some point in their lives, often during adolescence or in response to crisis or loss. But most people also retreat from it fairly quickly, accepting the program's implicit message that such questions are either unanswerable or irrelevant to practical life. The third level of questioning is what we might call ontological or mystical curiosity. It asks questions like, what is reality? What is consciousness? What is the relationship between them? These questions do not merely press against the boundaries of the program. They target the foundations upon which the program rests. They question the assumptions that make the program possible, the invisible premises that must remain invisible for the program to function. And this level of questioning is genuinely dangerous, not because it leads to madness or destruction, but because it can actually succeed. It can reveal what lies beneath the constructions of culture and language and ordinary consciousness. It can grant access to dimensions of reality that the program exists to exclude. McKenna's particular contribution to the discourse of consciousness evolution was his insistence that this third level of questioning was not only possible, but necessary. Not for everyone, not immediately, but for enough people at this particular moment in history to make a difference. He saw that the old programs, the cultural operating systems, that have maintained human civilization for millennia were reaching the end of their useful life. They were designed for a world that no longer exists, and they are producing outcomes, both ecological and psychological, that threaten the continued existence of the species. Something new is needed, and the new cannot emerge from within the old. It can only emerge from questioning that reaches down to the foundations and opens a space for genuine novelty. What distinguishes the third level of questioning from the first two is not just its depth, but its direction. Technical curiosity and philosophical curiosity are both directed outward, toward the world, toward existence, toward the answers that reality might provide. Ontological curiosity is directed at the very distinction between the questioner and the questioned, between consciousness and its objects, between the self that asks and the reality that answers. It does not seek answers within any framework. It seeks to understand how frameworks arise, how the very possibility of questions and answers emerges from something more fundamental than either. This is why the psychedelic experience was so important to McKenna's project. Psychedelics, whatever else they may do, have the capacity to reveal the constructed nature of ordinary consciousness from the inside. They do not just provide new content within the existing framework. They reveal the framework itself as content, as something that consciousness is doing rather than something that simply is. And in that revelation, the third level of questioning becomes not just possible, but almost inevitable. You cannot see the framework as framework and continue to take it for granted. The question of what lies beyond the framework arises spontaneously, irresistibly, as a natural consequence of having seen through the illusion of givenness. But we must be careful here, because this can easily become another form of spiritual materialism, another program masquerading as freedom from programming. The pursuit of exotic experiences, the collection of mystical states, the spiritual tourism that consumes enlightenment teachers and traditions like products in a marketplace, these are all ways that the ego learns to appropriate the third level of questioning without actually submitting to its transformative power. And the result is not evolution, but a kind of inflation, a bloating of the spiritual self-image that actually increases rather than decreases the distance from genuine awakening. What distinguishes authentic third-level questioning from its counterfeit is the willingness to question the questioner. Not just to question reality, but to question the one who is questioning reality. Not just to seek experiences beyond the ordinary, but to examine who it is that seeks such experiences and why. This reflexive dimension of inquiry is what prevents the process from becoming another form of acquisition, another enhancement of the very ego that must ultimately be seen through. McKenna was well aware of this danger, which is why he always emphasized that the psychedelic experience was not the point. The point was what you did with the experience, how you integrated it, whether it actually changed the way you lived and questioned and related to reality. An experience that is simply collected and stored, added to the repertoire of interesting things that have happened to you, is worthless or worse than worthless. An experience that actually transforms the structure of consciousness, that opens doorways that remain open, that initiates a process of ongoing questioning that does not end when the substance wears off. This is what the technology was designed for. And this brings us back to the central claim of this entire discourse. Reality upgrades those who question it, not through magic or supernatural intervention, but through the natural consequences of aligning consciousness with the fundamental direction of evolution. The universe is a system that increases in complexity and consciousness over time. This is not a belief or a hope. It is an observable pattern that runs from the Big Bang through the formation of stars and planets, through the emergence of life and the development of nervous systems, through the evolution of human consciousness and the creation of culture. Complexity increases, consciousness deepens, and the mechanism by which this increase occurs at every level is something like curiosity, something like questioning, something like the pressure of inquiry against the boundaries of the given. When an individual consciousness aligns itself with this direction, when it chooses to participate in the increase of complexity and consciousness rather than merely consuming the products of past increases, something clicks into place. The universe recognizes an ally, a participant, a node in its own process of self-discovery. And it responds by including that consciousness more fully in the process, by revealing more of itself, by offering opportunities for growth and discovery that are simply not available to those who have opted out of participation. This is not a metaphor. This is not a spiritual teaching designed to make people feel better about their existential situation. This is a description of what actually happens, verifiable through direct experience by anyone willing to make the experiment. The experiment is not easy, and the results are not guaranteed, but the evidence of thousands of years of mystical testimony, combined with the more recent evidence of psychedelic research and the leading edge of consciousness studies, all points in the same direction. Consciousness is not epiphenomenal. It is not a byproduct of material processes. It is a fundamental feature of reality, perhaps the most fundamental feature, and its evolution is not accidental but purposeful. And we, each of us, are offered the opportunity to participate in that purpose. Not through belief, not through obedience, not through the acceptance of any external authority, but through the simple, radical act of questioning, through asking genuine questions and following them wherever they lead, through refusing to accept the given as final and insisting on direct experience of whatever lies beyond. This is the path that reality rewards, and the reward is nothing less than participation in the ongoing creation of the cosmos. We arrive now at the question that has been implicit throughout. What does all of this mean for how we actually live? If reality upgrades those who question it, if consciousness evolves through the pressure of genuine curiosity against the boundaries of the given, what are the practical implications for a human being trying to navigate existence in this particular moment of history? The first implication is that the cultivation of genuine curiosity becomes not just an intellectual preference, but a spiritual practice, perhaps the most important spiritual practice available to a contemporary consciousness. Not curiosity about trivia, not curiosity about entertainment, not the restless seeking of novelty that characterizes the consumer mind, but genuine curiosity about the nature of reality itself. This means taking your questions seriously. It means refusing to accept answers that do not actually satisfy, even when those answers are provided by authorities or traditions, or the consensus of everyone around you. It means following your questions wherever they lead, even when they lead into uncomfortable territory, even when the social cost of asking them is high. This is not easy, and it is not meant to be easy. The program has had your entire lifetime to install its constraints, and it has backup systems for its backup systems. Every time you push against one boundary, you discover another behind it. Every time you think you have seen through one layer of conditioning, a deeper layer reveals itself. This is not a failure. It is the nature of the work. The questioning is not meant to reach a final answer that allows you to stop questioning. The questioning is itself the practice, the path, the mode of being that aligns consciousness with its evolutionary purpose. The second implication is that what we call knowledge must be radically reimagined. Knowledge, in the sense that matters for consciousness evolution, is not the accumulation of information, or the mastery of techniques, or the acquisition of credentials recognized by institutional authorities. Knowledge is direct experience of reality beyond the filters of the program. It is what McKenna called the felt presence of immediate experience, the raw encounter with what is actually happening before the mind has processed it into familiar categories and comfortable interpretations. This kind of knowledge cannot be transmitted through words or texts or teachings, though these can point toward it and prepare the ground for it. It can only be gained through direct contact, through the willingness to submit one's certainties to the test of experience, through the courage to look directly at what is there rather than what one expects or hopes or fears to see. And this kind of knowledge, once gained, cannot be lost or taken away. It becomes part of the structure of consciousness itself, a permanent upgrade that changes everything that follows. The third implication is that community matters in ways that the individualistic bias of modern culture makes difficult to recognize. The program maintains itself not primarily through individual psychology, but through social agreement. Its power comes from consensus, from the mutual reinforcement of millions of consciousnesses, all operating within the same framework. And this means that breaking free of the program is not purely an individual matter. It requires the support of others who are engaged in the same process, others who can validate experiences that the consensus would dismiss as impossible, others who can provide feedback and perspective when the journey becomes disorienting. This is why McKenna spoke so often about the importance of community, about the role of conversation and dialogue in the evolution of consciousness. It is why he spent so much of his life speaking, teaching, sharing his experiences and ideas with anyone who would listen. Not because he had final answers that others lacked, but because the process of articulation itself, the attempt to put ineffable experiences into language and share them with other minds, is part of how consciousness expands. The questions that arise in genuine dialogue are different from the questions that arise in isolation. The reality that reveals itself to a community of questioners is larger than the reality that reveals itself to any individual alone. The fourth implication is that time is of the essence. McKenna was convinced, and his conviction was based on careful analysis of historical patterns and deep intuition rather than arbitrary belief, that we are approaching some kind of threshold, some critical point beyond which the old ways of being and knowing can no longer sustain themselves. Whether this threshold manifests as ecological collapse or technological singularity or some other unprecedented transformation, the message is the same. The luxury of postponing genuine questioning until some more convenient future date is not available. The future is arriving faster than the past prepared us to expect, and only those who have already begun the work of upgrading their consciousness will be prepared to navigate what is coming. This is not meant as fear-mongering or apocalyptic thinking. McKenna's vision of the future was not pessimistic. It was radically optimistic. He believed that consciousness was capable of meeting whatever challenges arose, that the evolutionary mechanism built into the very structure of awareness would respond to crisis with creativity, would find solutions that could not have been imagined from within the problem space that generated them. But this optimism was not passive. It did not assume that things would work out regardless of what anyone did. It assumed that the outcome depended on participation, on enough individuals choosing to question, on enough consciousnesses activating the upgrade that would allow them to engage with whatever the future brought. The fifth implication is that the questioning cannot remain abstract. It must engage with the actual conditions of one's life, with the specific circumstances and relationships and challenges that one faces. The program is not something separate from one's daily existence. It is the structure of that existence, the invisible framework that determines how one perceives and interprets and responds to everything that happens. And this means that genuine questioning must be brought to bear on the concrete details, not just on philosophical abstractions about the nature of reality. What does this mean in practice? It means questioning your assumptions about what you want and why you want it. It means examining the beliefs that underlie your decisions about how to spend your time and energy. It means looking carefully at the ways you avoid discomfort and asking whether that avoidance is serving your growth or preventing it. It means bringing the same quality of attention to your relationships, your work, your health, your creativity that the mystic brings to meditation or the scientist brings to experiment. Nothing is excluded from the inquiry because the program operates everywhere and the upgrade must therefore be comprehensive. The sixth and final implication is that the reward is intrinsic to the process. You do not question reality in order to receive some future benefit, some eventual payoff that justifies the cost of questioning. You question reality because questioning is what consciousness does when it is awake, when it has not been lulled back into the trance of the given. The upgrade is not something that happens later, after you have questioned enough. The upgrade is happening right now, in the very act of genuine questioning, regardless of what answers emerge or do not emerge. This is perhaps the hardest thing to understand for minds that have been trained to think in terms of investment and return, effort and reward, means and ends. The program teaches that everything valuable must be achieved through some process that is itself without value. That meaning lies always in the destination rather than the journey. But genuine curiosity reveals something different. The journey is the destination. The question is the answer. The seeking is the finding. To ask a genuine question is already to participate in the process by which reality creates itself. And there is no higher participation available to a conscious being than this. The universe is not waiting for you to finish your questioning so that it can reward you with some prize at the end. The universe is expressing itself through your questioning right now, exploring its own possibilities through the particular configuration of consciousness that you are. Every genuine question you ask expands the space of what is possible. Every boundary you press against creates pressure that may eventually break through. Every moment of authentic inquiry adds something to the total store of consciousness in the cosmos. This is what McKenna wanted us to understand, not as a belief to be adopted or a teaching to be followed, but as a reality to be experienced directly by anyone willing to make the experiment. Question reality. Question it persistently and genuinely and courageously. And watch what happens. Watch how reality responds. Watch how your experience begins to change, how doors begin to open, how the impossible begins to seem merely improbable, and then probable, and then finally, actual. The upgrade is available. It has always been available. It will always be available. The only variable is you, your willingness to question, your courage to follow the questions wherever they lead, your persistence in the face of everything that would rather you remain asleep. Reality is watching. It knows who is asking genuine questions and who is merely going through the motions. And it responds accordingly, not because it is cruel or arbitrary, but because this is how evolution works, how consciousness expands, how the cosmos comes to know itself more fully through the beings who are brave enough to ask what it actually is. The question is not whether you will be rewarded for questioning. The question is whether you will question at all. And this question, unlike most questions, has an answer that only you can provide. No one can question on your behalf. No one can upgrade your consciousness for you. The choice is yours, and it is available right now, in this very moment, regardless of what came before and regardless of what you imagine might come after. Reality is waiting to see what you will do. And what you will do, whether you question or accept, whether you press against the boundaries or settle comfortably within them, will determine not just your own future, but the future of the cosmos that is looking out through your eyes. The universe upgrades those who question it. This is not a promise or a guarantee or a contract. It is simply a description of how things work, a report from those who have made the experiment and discovered what lies on the other side of genuine inquiry. The report is consistent across cultures and throughout history. The mechanism is real. The opportunity is present. What remains is only the question of whether you will take it up, whether you will add your voice to the chorus of questioning that has been sounding since the first moment of awareness, whether you will participate in the great work that consciousness is doing in this cosmos. The question is addressed to you. Reality is listening for your answer.